Hey, how's it going? Um, I recently had a great conversation with a new best friend of mine on Reddit. They were talking about getting their portfolio together, getting their statement together, and sending off an application to an MFA program they're really excited about. They're really looking forward to working with a certain famous poet, hoping this poet would be able to kind of learn them the ropes and help them out. And just thought this was a great opportunity to kind of take a quick time out, take a step back, and talk about, should you get an MFA? Now, the MFA program gets a lot of hate, and I think a lot of that hate is justified. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of things to say about what's wrong with this whole scene. So let's break this down from two core angles. Let's start with what I think is the most common one you're going to hear. This critique is going to come from your uncle who works at the auto body shop, or as an accountant, or middle management, or whatever. They're going to say that from a capitalist perspective, it's just poor ROI. In 2016, there are about 244 MFA programs. There's probably more now. They mint about 3,000 MFAs in creative writing per year. So you could say in 10 years, that's 30,000. That's a lot. That's a huge number of people with MFAs walking around. Now, unfortunately, there's only about 5 tenure track job openings in 2016. Maybe there's fewer now. Maybe there's slightly more. Who knows? But the basic fact of the matter is that those 3,000 new grads, they're not going to have the qualifications to get any of those 5 jobs. None of them. So exactly 0 of them will go to work with using the degree. Now you could say, could they get a job in a related field? Maybe you could try to work in publishing, for example. Well, the problem is you could have just gotten a degree in publishing or in literature in general or, whatever, in business. And you go into that job interview, assuming you get it, and they sit down and say, well, what's with this MFA in creative writing? Do you want to write poetry or do you want to edit? Because if you want to write your own stuff, that's one thing. And if you want to edit other people's, that's another. And we see a conflict of interest here. We want to make sure you're focused on this job. And you're going to have to tap dance that. The capitalist critique would also say there's a huge opportunity cost, meaning you could have been doing something else with your life, getting ready for a real career, which actually pays so you can support your family, so you can go on vacation, so you can do whatever you want. And they'll say, ultimately, what are you trying to do with this MFA? It sounds like hedonism. It sounds like you're conflating or confusing the difference between work and play. Work is something that you don't necessarily enjoy, but you do to make money. And play is something you do in your free time. And sure, everyone wants to grow up to be a baseball star or a rock star, but we realize that that's not possible. And we spend our free time wisely on doing stuff that's fun for cost-controlled amounts of money. I mean, you want to save up and go to Disney World, go to Disney World. You want to tour in Europe, you want to travel in Europe and, write some poetry in your weeks off, then do that. But don't confuse one for the other. That's the capitalist critique, right? So keep it as a hobby. And don't kind of ruin your life pursuing something that's a pipe dream. Well, let's look at it from the other perspective. Getting spicy, huh? You guys didn't see that one coming now, did you? We're going to crack the Marxist critique on the MFA program because it doesn't look so good on the other shoe either. So, according to kind of Marxist perspective on literature, so-called great literature is largely a justification of the ruling class. So in other words, it says, well, we're noble, we have these great tastes, we have these virtues that essentially are, passed on from one generation to another. That's why we're in charge and you're not, right? So that's their idea. In great literature, then you ought to strive to understand this stuff, or if you can't, that's fine too, because we'll decide what's great and what's not. That's our job. We're the ruling class. Now there's another class of stuff of books and plays and stuff like that. That's just entertainment. social reproduction. Social reproduction is this Marxist idea that after you go to work, the laborers come home and they need to relax a little bit so they can, do their laundry or whatever, so they can be ready for another day at the factory the next day. And you want to give them stuff that doesn't excite them too much, doesn't make them revolutionary or upset or fatigue them overly. They can go to the pub and sing songs and then be ready again to work. There's a third category of bourgeois literature. So people who aren't rulers, but maybe they own a shop or, they're tradespeople. They want something tasteful that wouldn't offend their neighbors to know. They want nice, tidy books on the shelf that look good and show that they're a person of certain distinction. But they don't want to offend anyone. So they want a kind of sanitized, kind of middle of the road type of stuff, kind of like, HBO type stuff as opposed to, I don't know. You guys get the idea. It can be a little bit daring, but it can't be too crazy, right? Now, Marx had this idea, and future revolutionaries had this idea that there was such a thing as revolutionary art, things that were going to challenge the status quo and help advance this revolutionary movement. And such type of art would essentially be focused on a merger of the intellectual class and the proletariat. It would be the voice of the working class, and would serve to speak and advance and educate and motivate revolutionary activity. I'll pose to you, which class of literature do you think the MFA program produces in general? Which is designed to teach and promote? You could say, well, great literature, but great literature, that's something that's defined in retrospect later on by a certain class of kind of intellectuals or critics or something, and it doesn't really have that much to do with the MFA. And we basically dismantled this whole idea of like canon work anyway. That's in the garbage can these days. We don't have that anymore. There's people talking about great literature. They'll look at you sideways if you say, "Oh, that's great literature," and people will be like, "Great? What? I mean, who gets to define that?" We've thrown that idea in the garbage can. So then you could say, well, probably you're not learning how to write entertainment. You'd probably do that at film school or something like that. So what you're left with is kind of this bourgeois literature, because you're not going to be writing revolutionary poetry. Trust me, at an MFA program, it's not going to work. I mean, how's that going to work? You're going to bring in something that criticizes and attacks your professors and the institution. I mean, it's just they're not ready for that, man. It's not going to work. Okay, you're not even going to be doing that there. It's producing bourgeois literature, produces safe, tasteful, yet inoffensive stuff that can get published in these, tasteful, inoffensive literary magazines. Now, some of that stuff's great, and I probably write stuff that's like tasteful and inoffensive by and large. I try to, kick some bees' nests here and there, but, by and large, let's face it. I mean, the stuff that mostly gets published in most of these journals that nobody reads is tasteful. It's bourgeois. That's what MFA programs are designed to produce, is tasteful bourgeois literature. In other words, boring shit, right? Not to put too fine a point on it, but while you're learning how to write bourgeois literature, they're also robbing you blind. You're either going to be forced labor teaching composition classes, if you're fortunate enough to get a fellowship, or you are going to be taking out massive student loans so you can pay these institutions that, by the way, are tax exempt, own tons and tons of land, have fat cat administrators, are competing against one another to conquer the world. They have huge endowments and investment funds and all sorts of shady things. Marx wouldn't be happy with any of that. And your professors are doing just fine. I'm not going to blame the professors and throw them under the bus, but they're certainly doing a lot better than the students, right? It's this massive upward redistribution of wealth. It's like this Jeff Bezos paradigm all over again. You're going to be working in the fucking packing plant, putting people's goodies in boxes. That's the MFA program, all right? You should read Revolt of the Elites by Christopher Lasch, and why you should read it is he describes this idea that if we really wanted to have this kind of educated American democracy, we wouldn't pluck people out of their backgrounds, of their neighborhoods, of their from their parents and from their peers, and move them to these cities, these elite cities. We would allow people to represent their backgrounds and interests, both politically and socially, so that if you came from a certain background, a certain place, you could gain the education you needed to advance for your people. There's much more nuance in that, but basically, if you were lucky enough to be successful, quote unquote, in an MFA program, and you develop a career as a poet, you're not going to be able to effectively represent where you came from and who you are anymore anyway, because you're going to become someone else. You're going to become a professor. You're going to become exactly the thing that you hated when you started. Let's talk a little bit about why that is. Let's talk about American meritocracy. You have these, let's say over 10 years, 5 years, whatever, you have these MFA grads accumulating over 10 years, 3,000 MFA grads a year. You end up with 30,000 of them submitting to lit mags, let's say. Some of them fade out and some of them die and whatever. But, broadly speaking, you're going to have a certain percentage of people sending out to literary magazines who have MFAs. Now, I don't know if that's 10 grand or 50 grand. It depends what time frame you look at. But, there's going to be a lot of people firing away on these literary submissions. And there'll also be some people who don't have MFAs firing away at these literary submissions. So, the top tier ones take less than 1% of the stuff that's submitted to them. Could be 0.5%. I mean, the New Yorker, basically, they're not going to take anything from anybody but, the very, very top names in the field. And the same for like the Paris Review and stuff like that. So maybe, you could find other markets which do take some. But generally speaking, they take very, very few. They all say, "Oh, we welcome emerging writers. We welcome new poets and new names." But they welcome shit. I mean, statistically, it's just completely untrue at the top tier. Now, there's a lot of smaller journals with smaller circulations that really do specialize in this quote unquote discovering talent. But if you're trying to make your career, you're going to have to get published in major magazines. Why is that? Because then after that, you're going to submit your work to a manuscript contest for a first book. So you want to win a first book contest because that's going to launch your career. You're going to be paying $35 a manuscript contest for the right to hopefully get to a judge and win it. However, if you haven't published a lot of those poems in prestigious literary magazines, there's going to be some intern or grad student or staffer who probably knows about as much about poetry as you do, hopefully more, but not necessarily. And they're going to look at your acknowledgments page and see where you previously published those poems. And if those poems haven't been published and many of them, 30 or 40 of those poems haven't been published or haven't been published well, they're going to chuck your manuscript in the garbage and you're never going to get out of the first round. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but that's generally a good rule of thumb. You're going to be throwing away money on these manuscript contests, which might not bother you since you already threw away money on your MFA. But here you are, you're not going to get out of the first round unless you've been published quite a bit, which is why there's such a hustle to publish in these lit mags. If you win this first book contest, which is unlikely when you have thousands of people competing against you, but that's why I say it's 0.01% there, then you can go on to adjuncting. See where this is going. It's a long road out there till you achieve professorship, and each each rung in this ladder has an awful lot of winnowing involved. You could say, well, maybe you'll make some money on your poetry in the meantime, but lit mags pay very little. The most I've ever received is like $100, which I think is quite a bit for a lit mag to be able to pay me. But that's very unusual. Most of the time, it's nothing. It's zilch. It's a contributor's copy. Sometimes you'll get $20. Sometimes you'll get $50. But more often than not, you don't get anything. And if you are lucky enough to win one of these book contests, you're not going to make that much money off your book. The biggest contest, the most prestigious ones, maybe pay you $5,000, and your book sales are going to be pretty modest, so you're not going to receive much more than that. So, I would just say, taking a step back and trying to integrate all these different ideas, you really have to understand this kind of risk reward. And what is the reward? What is the idea that you have when you're going in? You have this idea that you're going to be discovered, that a famous poet's going to take you under their wing, that you're going to learn the ropes, that they're going to help you get published. And, I'm not going to say that could never, ever happen and is totally unrealistic and you're an idiot for thinking that. But I really do think most people most of the time go through these programs without those types of experiences where, it's unlikely anyone's going to take you under their wing unless, there's some weird sex stuff going on, which I don't recommend. You could learn some great things from some of these folks, but there might be other ways for you to learn that are comparable without needing to depend on someone else and putting kind of your emotional energy into someone else. You could invest that in other ways. And I think you're going to experience at these programs a lot of competition and a lot of pressure to either get better and advance or to quit. And when you get out, you're going to wonder, well, why am I doing this? And why is this something I want to do? And writing for you, that used to be this thing where you could kind of come home after work and light a candle and put on tea and spend some quiet time with yourself, is the capitalists would call it, well, just a hobby, a kind of hedonistic pursuit. And the Marxists would call this kind of pointlessly bourgeois. But I think neither of those is quite fair. Whatever you want to call it as value to you, you assign some number to this in terms of dollars or revolutionary ideas or just yourself. There's no number ultimately I think you can really put on your own enjoyment of poetry composition, of revision, of reading the poets of others, of going to the open mics and maybe sending some stuff around or sharing your stuff on the internet, whatever you want to do on your blog. People say, well, it's just selfish. Your poetry isn't significant, but it's selfish to want your poetry to be significant anyway. It's all selfish. We can't take any of this stuff with us when we die. If we're praised and people are like, your poetry's awesome, you can't take that with you either. So if it's important to you, if this is something you genuinely enjoy and is generally part of who you are, whether it's a spiritual practice, whether it's a relaxation, mental health practice, it's a form of self-expression, who knows, whether it's just something you really, truly enjoy, I would be careful about, that risk that an MFA program is going to end up essentially damaging something that you very much enjoy and that you get a lot out of on a personal level. Now, obviously, there are probably tons of people who go through an MFA program and they don't end up pursuing a quote unquote career as a poet or writer, but they still enjoy writing in their free time. But I would actually tell you that's probably a minority. I've met anecdotally here a lot of people who've done these programs, they get out and they stop writing completely. Because for most people, and especially I would say a lot of Americans, if you can't do something well, it's not really worth doing it. It's kind of like, an athlete. You get to some level of competition where you can't get any farther, and then you shift gears. And for a lot of people, there's this idea, well, I'm going to take this risk on an MFA program. If I can crack into the big leagues, then awesome. If not, no problem. I'll do something else with my life. And I really want to caution you against that. And it's not because I think you're going to make it if you just stick at it, but I do think it's unfair to yourself to treat yourself this way. I think if poetry is truly something that has so much meaning and importance to you that you should be willing to spend all this time and money to take it so seriously, it's something you should be a little bit more reluctant to give up on. Maybe a better approach would be, you deepen your practice, you write some more, you revise some more, maybe you send some stuff out, you attend some readings, go to some open mics, buy some poetry books of people working today, and just get a better understanding of what's going on in the world, and keep at it for a little while and see how things go, right? And if you like it and you're enjoying it and good things are happening and you just feel like things are clicking, or this is just something you want to continue to pursue, then I think it becomes more clear that the MFA poses little risk to you. You could do a low residency program, or you could go and move to a city to do it. But I think at this point, you're more likely to be able to identify the program that's right for you. You're more likely to understand what this paying for access model really means. You'll know, let's say you're really excited to work with Gary Snyder. You'll know maybe you get to the program and Gary Snyder's on sabbatical. Maybe his wife is sick or whatever. Maybe he's really busy with other stuff, and you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You apply to a bunch of different programs based on the overall vibe and based on maybe you already know some people who've gone through them and you've talked to them and figured out, kind of what their track record is. And you feel like this is the right thing for me. I can afford this. I can take this risk. And I think ultimately the risk to my practice, which is the most important thing I want you to think about here, the risk to your own practice is low. And the upside part about what it could do for you and how far it could take you. Okay. I understand that we all need to think about those things in life, but maybe that's not something you think about as much. Maybe think more about what it could do for your own writing. And you understand that ultimately the greatest thing an MFA program can do is give you a little bit of cut away a little bit of space, give you some time to dedicate to it. Perhaps you meet some other people going through similar things. And there's this mix of taking some literature classes and getting some feedback from the profs. And it's a lot of money and a lot of time to spend on it, probably way more than it's worth. But you're at a point where you feel like, I'll take the good with the bad. I'll try to make the most of it. But I would say for the overwhelming majority of people who consider it, just look at those numbers. Most people have more to lose than they think. And a lot of people end up losing it all. So they go in to that high stakes casino that is MFA capitalism, and they bet it all on black. I don't want you to do that. I think poetry means too much to me and should mean too much for you to gamble on it. Take it seriously and take your time, and you'll know if the MFA is right for you. Thanks for joining me.